Afternoon. This is Matthew Holt. It's the healthcare blogs podcast called THCB Gang. For those of you who haven't heard it before, we're a group where we get together and a group of sort of old healthcare lags talk about the healthcare system and anything else we choose to for about an hour. So it's the Gen 26 edition. I am the founder and publisher of the healthcare blog. With me today, I have Kim Bellard, a regular contributor, writer, ex-managed care executive. Rosemarie Day, strategist from Day Health Strategies in Boston, Massachusetts, and Jeff Goldsmith, health futurist. All right, so welcome everybody. Great to see all of you. And I think it's the first time of the year for everybody. We rotate the gang. One minor thing, I put everyone's Twitter handle on there. Jeff's never had a Twitter handle. He's so far ahead of us, so far ahead of the game, because last week, JL Neptune said, take my Twitter handle off. I've now officially quit. He downloaded all his stuff and said he's off. And he said he had an interesting reason. He said that, I'm running an addiction clinic these days, and I realized I'm addicted to it. I go off cold turkey. And I was kind of thinking, yeah, he's probably right. We're talking about my addictions include Twitter, ice cream, Premier League soccer, other things.
Guinness.
Yeah. I am less addicted to alcohol than I used to be. If that's although some of you may have seen the reports out this week saying that any alcohol is now considered bad for you, which
Sure.
the human
just wait 10 minutes. Wait
right.
10 minutes.
Let's kick off. What have we been looking at? What have we been thinking about this week, last couple of weeks? Why don't I start with you, Kim?
Well, lots of interesting stuff going on. Hopefully some of the other people will talk about some of the things, but I want to talk a little bit about the U.S. News and World Report medical school flop. As some of you may know, I think it was Harvard that started the ball rolling. They complained about the way that they do their rankings, and they pulled out of it. Now a number of other top medical schools, including Stanford and others, have also pulled out. And they've had similar flaps with law schools and universities in general, and probably the best docs too. And I don't disagree that there's a problem. It's hard to measure quality of these things, and the rankings may artificially provide incentives or not. But what I do mind is these people are pulling out and not saying, well, what we should do instead is this. And this, to me, is the existential problem in healthcare, that we don't like the quality measures that we have, but we don't really come up with other quality measures that are better. So as it sits, we don't really know what a good medical school is. We don't really know how going to a good medical school makes you a better doctor or doesn't. And we don't certainly know who the good doctors are. So we just exist in this fog of not knowing anything about really quality in healthcare. And that bothers me. I wish they would say, I don't want to do this, so we're going to start doing this instead. And they're not.
Right. There was a tweet earlier this week which said something like not telling people about CPT codes and E&M codes and revenue cycle management in medical school is a crime. And I said, I think actually CPT codes, E&M codes, and medical and revenue cycle management themselves are the crime. But anyway. Yeah. All right, I've got you laughing, Rosemarie. So tell me about what you've been up to, what you've been looking at. The stuff you can tell us.
Well, a couple of things. One is I'm, of course, always keeping an eye on how the Affordable Care Act is going. And so really had a banner year. Open enrollment has exceeded expectations and is the highest ever. And it's not actually over yet. A number of states are giving folks through the end of January. But even as of January 15th, there's over 16 million people who have signed up for the coverage through the ACA marketplaces. And the biggest credit can go to the fact that the subsidies have increased, but also just keeping the drumbeat going with outreach and enrollment, all the strategies that when you believe in covering people with healthcare as an administration, you employ those strategies. And so that's exciting. I'm always just still glad the ACA is here and for all kinds of reasons, but to see those numbers, some of the folks have just been saying, the fact that it's almost kind of stabilized. I mean, there had been all the politics around it. And as I had said in a previous show that we did, like right after the election, it was the first time no Republican campaigned on repealing the ACA. So it also helps see us through the pandemic. So just thinking about that is like pretty amazing that now, insurers can feel like there's a viable market here and I can go in and stay in. And so it just takes a while for things to stabilize. So that's one thing. And then I want to come back a couple of sessions I was attending this week, a lot of talk about trust in healthcare. And I mean that like between physician and their patients, and how are we going to address some of the health inequities, and one kind of through line that is intriguing me is this notion of trust. And so I want to come back to that, and maybe that ties back to that is the crime there on the rev like whatever, but I'm thinking like front facing healthcare, patients and doctors.
Well, it's excellent. It's the start of the year, and I too was in the nearly registered for Obamacare on the exchange. I ended up staying away from it, partly because it's got a lot of issues for people who perhaps are getting a little bit older than they used to be in terms of how it costs money, and compared to employer-based COBRA, which was the alternative I had. And I can go through that a little bit. It's still my one-liner is, Obamacare, hell of a lot better than what we used to have, back before 2013. Nowhere near as good as any other country in the world. Sorry. Jeff. Oh, you're on mute.
Turn on I got my mic. Yet another article dropped in the relentless drumbeat of hostile academic studies of hospital-based health systems in the United States. Michael Chinner's group at Harvard and studied hospital mergers and the combinations of hospital systems, and found limited or no societal benefits and higher cost. I wish the industry was doing a better job of explaining how it is exactly that they're creating benefits from doing a lot of these deals, but they just seem to be mute. They don't seem to respond substantively to what I think is a significant challenge to the legitimacy of what they're doing. I personally believe that a lot of those high costs are driven by the fact that they're propping up significant pieces of the rest of the health system. They've absorbed a third of the practicing docs in the United States. That might increase cost. What do you think? They're, the de facto mental health resource. Acute care medicine is not the place to take care of mental health problems, but we seem to have shut down most of the other alternatives. Long-term care got hammered by the pandemic, and as a result, a lot of folks in hospitals can't get placed. So they're sitting there in limbo, generating cost. And yet it's all the hospital's fault. I've been critic of this industry to the point where it's damaged my lecture business, but I think it's gone way overboard. And apropos of your comment about other health systems, the most revered health system in the world, your British National Health Service, seems to be falling apart.
Same.
I don't think that's that's not something to feel good about. 13,000 people that can't be placed in the allegedly superior community social care system that Britain built, 7 million people on waiting lists, strikes by ambulance workers, 55-minute delays for people getting ambulances to their houses. So I'm not sure about the statement you made a minute ago.
Matthew's not going to bring you back.
Let me defend the statement. Let me refine defend the statement, because you're dead right about the UK. So two things about the UK. One is hit with a triple whammy. One, when we and I was actually on somebody was asking me about comparative healthcare systems this morning. I was talking, and this is what I told them. So I think it's true. Don't forget, we had Bush in power when the crisis hit in 2008, and so we got out the Republicans and got in Democrats who wanted to spend money. The inverse was true in the UK. The election was won by the party which didn't like to spend money, and they did austerity from 2010 onwards, which really hurt the British economy, which did a lot of things, including made people in poor parts of Britain have tougher time, not only with the health service, but they were told that this was all the fault of immigrants in the European Union, which led to Brexit. And there was a lot of, we can go back and forth about now this week, the head of the FBI office monitoring Russian infiltration in the in 2016 through 18 was arrested for being in the pay of a Russian oligarch. So you can go back and forth about
what the hell does that have to do with the National Health Service?
I'll get there. You can argue how much the Russians influenced the Brexit vote, but the Brexit vote has really hit the NHS because a lot of workers left, and then we had COVID, right? So we had austerity, Brexit, COVID, and a lack of investment. And that's been, the Labour government under Blair put the percent of GDP, which they can control, into healthcare precisely from about 6 to about 9%. And it stayed there, and probably it should be more like 11, 12, where the Germans and the French are. And because it's not, I think that's a lot of the reasons why, the NHS is in the trouble that it's in today. At some point, you do have to spend money to take care of stuff. And I agree with you. When my dad had his first heart attack before he died, the ambulance didn't come for 3 hours. Plus COVID, it's obviously.
Yeah, Matthew.
So, yeah.
Back up for a minute.
Sure.
We do not have universal health care in the United States. We still have, at peak, 8 or 9% of the population uninsured. But universal health care only works if there's a societal commitment to underwrite the investment and to prevent it from falling apart. So it's not just universal health care, this glowing thing that we don't seem to be able to do here in the States that matters. It's the ability of the society to support the system and the implicit promises that it made. And I don't care who's in charge of the government, whether it's conservatives or labor or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. If they can't support the promise they've made, it's a hollow promise.
I agree. And you would, and I think there is a real question as to whether for the last 10 years, the Conservative government, which is in the UK, we don't have to get into what's been happening the last 30 years, but I don't really think they have that commitment and that promise anymore. And I think that, well,
there you go.
So I think,
where's the moral failing?
Let me say one thing. There are plenty of other models, we know I was in France or whatever, which seem to work better. But the bit and I agree with you, we can get into the universal healthcare thing and was there's commitment and what is their commitment to, etc. And we have the same issue here, obviously, or in terms of more obviously, it's a lack of clarity about what we're committed to. The bit I'm particularly interested in, though, is that when you sign up for Obamacare or the ACA, or even a typical high deductible plan, which in open enrollment now, is that you're having to make a bunch of calculations as a consumer that you're probably not able to fully understand what the implications are. And you still have within Obamacare the highest, there is in some areas silver plans, and Rosemarie will correct me, which have low co-payments, but still have very high deductibles, $9,500 family deductibles. And there is still considerable risk being placed on people who sign up for them. And in addition, you have to know how much money you're going to make in the year you're signing up for before you know what your subsidy is. And honestly, that's why in the end I didn't do it, because although there is much higher subsidies come in now for much higher incomes, which is why hopefully we have a decent income this year. I never know as a consultant, but we'll figure that out. It's like just lecture business. you get a few, you lose a few, it puts you in a different bracket, right?
I'm curious.
But just to finish the thought, Kim, the issue is that you're having to make a bunch of calculations about what you should take. And I really was going, I had a COBRA plan, which was from an employer, which was based on across the employer group, so it was cheaper than me as the head of my family, as the oldest person in my family, which bumped up the rates. And also, for reasons that are unclear, the COBRA plan got me access to One Medical, which is ridiculously expensive, whereas all the other exchange-based plans wouldn't let them in, which was very, very rational on their part, but they were still more expensive, way more expensive, unsubsidized. I don't know how much of that was my age versus, other stuff going on. But it's just a calculation which is tough to make. And we haven't even got into Blue Cross of Massachusetts moving my kids' medication from tier 1 to tier 2 without telling me about it. But that's a separate topic. Sorry, Kim and then Jeff.
I'm curious, Rosemarie, so what do you think is going to happen in 25 when the expanded subsidies supposedly go away? Will they have the political will to let them go away? And if they go away, does all that enrollment go away? Or is at this point, are we sunk into it and that's the new level of subsidies?
Well, it's a campaign issue, obviously, for 2024, right?
Sure.
And what's the balance in Congress? That's the fundamental thing. Because if it's the Republicans in charge, then the subsidies will be lapsed.
Yeah, well, they don't have to vote against it. They just don't have to extend it, right? They don't have to do anything and they go away, right?
But that's not the only risk. There's also the very significant number of people that are presently on Medicaid that, at least in theory, will be eligible for exchange coverage when they're booted off their Medicaid program by eligibility redeterminations. And where's the money going to come from to pay for all of that? That could be another, 5-6 million? You tell me, Rosemarie. Lots of people.
Oh, they'll come off of
Yeah,
Medicaid?
exactly, that are exchange eligible.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the most meta sense, right, we're if there's public dollars subsidizing Medicaid, obviously, and then it switches
Well-
over to exchange subsidy, so uh, there's different buckets of money, I understand that, but
Sure.
still, that's maybe just a switch.
But Medicaid is considerably less attractive politically, at least to one political party doesn't think very much of Medicaid, and are perhaps even less likely to support, exchange coverage. Because, oh, these are Medicaid people.
Yeah.
They're not our people.
Right, right. So, I mean, there'll still be exchange coverage, it's just the enhanced subsidies. But that, again, that can be a big campaign issue.
Okay, but if you want to push that forward,
Yep.
the chances of who knows? We're now already discussing 2024 House, but the map, the House could come back, right? Because it was the red wave and all that kind of stuff, and you can never know. The map for the Senate is dreadful, right? For the Democrats, I don't think there may be one. I mean, unless there's something extraordinary happens in the next couple of years that creates a sort of Obama style wave, which is unlikely because they are the party in power in two of the three branches, one of the two branches of Congress, and have the administration. I guess they're not in power in the courts. We won't discuss that today, but it's hard to see where the will to get this extension would come from. If you don't have 51 seats in the Senate, or 50 seats it is now with Sonoma doing her thing. I struggle to see where that comes from. And if you look at the math, it's more likely that the Republicans take the Senate, and who knows about the House.
Oh.
And who knows about, by the way, who knows about the presidency? Because
Who knows? But let's not forget, again, a very driving political issue is the fact that Roe v. Wade has been overturned. So
You betcha.
that can be ginned up again because it's only going to get worse before it gets better.
But it's not just that. You have an authentic group of crazies driving policy in the House that is going to damage the Republican brand. They're going to look like clowns. They do look like clowns. It's certainly not going to help with swing voters, with suburban voters, with women, for sure. There's already a problem there. Matthew, I don't buy your 24 analysis, I'm afraid.
well, I were these people not already crazy, and yet they just won the House?
No, they're even crazier.
I mean,
this
yes,
is-
they'll be
these
crazier
guys are-
in charge.
These guys are orbiting Venus.
Well, I saw two guys from the House Problem Solving Caucus this morning on one of the talk shows. And so it'll be interesting to me whether those, quote, centrist people in the House can keep the House from crashing the guardrails and, govern, or whether the crazies will dominate everything. Will those centrist
Say
people
more.
go along?
Who's on this problem-solving caucus?
It's both Dems and Republicans. I don't know their names, but they're 20 or 30 people. So they should have equal weight to the crazies, and they want to get that done. Like they were both like, we're not gonna blow the debt limit. Stop worrying about that. We're gonna figure something out. That kind of stuff.
Well, but there's, it's sort of, if you want to govern around McCarthy, there's a blunt instrument called the discharge petition, where a vote of a certain majority of folks, including all the Democrats and some of those marvelous, sensible Republicans, can force a vote on a specific issue over the dead body of the speaker. That's that's a blunt instrument. And it's not something that you can use to govern. The agenda is going to be set by McCarthy and his crew of merry pranksters.
Because, I mean, if you got rid of McCarthy, there would just be somebody else.
Yeah, no, I mean, neither of these parties is really capable of governing the country. Neither of them. They're both really badly divided. And I think I was not a Biden fan. He was not even my third choice as a Democratic nominee. I voted for him. I had to. But he has done an absolutely remarkable job of taming the crazies on his bench, and creating the most remarkable record of legislative accomplishment that we've seen since Lyndon Johnson.
And
Well,
and
let's
then-
remember
and then
Nancy
there were
Pelosi.
documents.
Well,
was-
yeah, but I mean, the
You
problem.
got to
is-
give Nancy Pelosi credit for that legislative.
Absolutely. She definitely deserves credit, but it's not, she wasn't the person managing the whole process.
And to be fair, you can talk about crazies on the left, but it's nothing like on the right.
Well, I'm with
You may have some dedicated socialists, right, and there's only 4 of them or 5 of them in the squad, right, and they are prepared to compromise. They want to make their political points, but they're prepared to compromise when they know it really matters, and they did. Whereas
there's a limit to how much the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is going to put off its own agenda. There's a limit, and I think Biden has bent over backwards to accommodate them.
Speaking as somebody who should be going into Medicare this year, based on the Biden campaign promise to lower at the age of 60, I'm waiting. Okay. I mean, you can argue back and forth, but I mean, it's very hard. I understand. You're going from Joe Manchin to AOC. This would be go back to the European example, apart from the UK. This was Italy or Germany. This would be 4 or 5 parties, and the Republicans would be 3 or 4. And we don't have that with our first past the post system and our big 10 parties, and it's just very, very tricky. And you can't govern. I mean, yes, Biden did incredibly well. You can't govern the way Lyndon Johnson did. You just don't have the numbers and the way that and the backroom deals or whatever he cut that you couldn't see back in the 60s to get all the stuff done. So,
but even there, Matthew, I mean, if you go back to the 60s, neither of these parties, I mean, both of these parties had tremendous spreads of ideological commitment. The Democrats had a huge chunk of Dixiecrats in that 68 vote majority that Johnson was wielding, and the Republicans, you went all the way from John Lindsay style Republicans to Roman Hruska. Both parties had this incredible ideological spread and were incredibly difficult to manage. So I don't think this is new at all.
Well, I'm annoyed because a lot of the money for the Infrastructure Act and the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act are going to red states and red counties. And I'm wondering, how much credit will the Dems get for that? And it's so annoying. I mean,
zero.
Tens of billions of dollars.
It's worse. These deficit lunatics that are prepared to drive our country off a cliff added $8 trillion to our public indebtedness during their 4 years in office. $8 trillion. It takes a lot of freaking nerve to turn around and be a deficit hawk after squandering that amount of money.
Well, I saw that Nancy Mace said, well, we're not going to cut Medicare, Medicaid, or military. That's for sure. Like, do you understand how much of the budget that is?
Right. No, they don't.
Coming off the surgery for transgender kids, it's something. Yeah, amazing. All right. Well, so the conclusion is that I am too hasty to say that and to agree with Kim, the subsidies are going to go away. They may be locked in, but I mean the other conclusion I want to point out is that, and I think it's what Rosemarie said right at the start, going back to Obamacare, it's kind of settled, right? That's how people who are not employer based are going to be getting their care, and Medicaid's going to come and go depending on the vagaries of the politics in terms of who's covered and who's not. Obviously, a lot of people are going to be uncovered shortly by it. And I go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, but the point that you made earlier is that it's not really health insurance if you've got a $9,000 deductible and you don't have the $9,000. It's bankruptcy insurance.
Well, but there also are medical expense subsidies that are built in. So lower income people get I forget if it's prospectively or retrospectively, but they get paid for those.
In the silver plan, which is moderately affordable, I think, for subsidies in most states, there is a whole bunch of extra subsidies there for co-pays and stuff.
And Rosemarie knows it's better than I do how this works, but there was an intended cap on the percentage of the household income that could be attributed out of pocket. And I can't remember how many people were covered by those caps.
And premiums as well, I believe.
That was an extremely important point that, frankly, I think as a policy matter ought to be extended to everybody that's in high deductible plans. it makes no sense at all to stick somebody with no savings with a $9,000 deductible. They're just not going to get the care. They're not going to get the drugs. They're not going to get the insulin. They're not going to get the things they need. So I think that part of Obamacare was really important, and really, it's amazing to me that there hasn't been more political pressure to insist that that's how public policy is made about insurance coverage.
I'm wondering how administratively it works. I mean, trying to figure out what their payments are and what their income is, that is not a trivial task, especially en masse.
Well, that's what broke the website in 2013, right? Which was that you had to try to estimate, you had to go off to somewhere else and estimate your income and come back and do the tax thing. And, it was just so complicated, they couldn't make it work. But now you're still, on Cabo California.
That was just for the subsidies. But, with the healthcare spending, like, well, do I get the money while I'm spending it, or do I have to go in debt and get reimbursed?
Yeah,
I don't know how it works.
I think you're basically, I think the way it works, and I'm maybe completely wrong here. So if you buy into a silver or gold plan, they have set caps to the actual spending and copays and what have you. I think for the 7.5%, I think it's 7.5% of income. I'm right in saying, I might be wrong in that. It's I think that includes premiums, I believe, but I may be wrong. We should probably, the four healthcare experts on the line here probably should know this, but that's going back to like the level of complexity compared to in France. You wander into the hospital, you pay your $50 for your X-ray, and you $50 for your doctor to tell you to go drink wine and not go mountain biking anymore. That's happened to me. And you get paid back 70% by the government, and everyone seems to be relatively happy. So the complexity thing, it certainly isn't going away anyway.
And that is the way it is. If you make a family of four making, I think it's under 42,000, so like 150% of the federal poverty level. If you buy on the exchange, you're going to have it's basically free healthcare and extremely low copays and deductibles. So that's for very, very low income folks. And then obviously you're looking higher up the scale there, Matthew, at the exchange stuff. But that was definitely one of the big improvements with the enhanced subsidies. And that especially in states that have not expanded Medicaid, because now families have an affordable, much more affordable option that isn't going to bankrupt them.
Did they fix the bit? Sorry, Jeff.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say there was at one point that you couldn't buy into the exchange if you were a non-expansion state and you earned, whatever the number was, below 100% of poverty. You couldn't buy in at one point, even if you wanted to. Did they fix that in the most recent?
So I don't remember when that happened, but yeah, this is so this is helping the folks where the states.
Having said that, Medicaid did get expanded in all the states anyway because of the public health emergency, and that's now going to get rolled back. So those are the people, as Jeff said, are going to come back to the exchange.
Oh, well, there's that form of expansion, but in terms of actually fully expanding the program, there's still 12 states that are holdouts.
Yeah, right.
12,
mostly in the South.
Right.
Yeah. All right, including one which has two Democratic senators now, after albeit with a Republican Democrat who apparently believes in global warming and wants to build electric trucks. I was reading about Kemp, in Georgia, so maybe there is some hope for the Republican Party at some point anyway in the future. All right. Okay, can we move on to I think we done with that a bit. There are two more things that came up. One was the equity issue that Rosemarie talked about, and the other one was Jeff's talking about. Was it David Cutler who wrote the piece, or was it I don't know.
No, Michael Chernow.
Michael Chernow about basically,
right.
But going back to the sort of healthcare systems, and I think I've been beaten enough by Jeff in the course of the last couple of years on this topic to go that even if I may not believe in the the overall, I don't know, the overall munificence and glory of big healthcare systems as a whole, and I'm very suspicious of their motives and of their hedge funds and that they run and all the other stuff that's going on with them, not to mention some of the bad behavior that the New York Times and others have been reporting about over the years. They are kind of what we got. And I was maybe cheerleading and hopeful that there would be, between all the spending on digital health and all the new types of different flavors of ACO and shared savings programs and new types of medical groups, coming on board over the last decade or so, that things would replace them. that's just not happening. I'm looking at it more and more, and you can see that, yeah, there is some, we just had JP Morgan week with all the analysis, and yes, there is some growth in Oak Street and all these other players, but it's not like Amazon replacing retailers that we had in the 2010s, and it's just not going to happen that way. So we are kind of stuck with them. So I'd love to, Jeff, you to dive in a bit more about what should they be doing to respond sort of on a PR basis to this kind of piece, and all the other stuff that they've had, the Providence going after its poorest patients for the money and all that kind of stuff. But also, what is the rational thing that we should think about that we should be doing regulation-wise or payment-wise to try to kind of, maybe it's even the gap between the bigger AMCs and the bigger systems and the independents, or what is it that we should, what is it we should be doing, as Kim suggested, to sort of try and figure out how do we actually, get them to improve quality and deliver a quote unquote a better product. What's your sense about both of those? So why don't you start on the PR piece, and what should they be saying in response?
Well, they could be talking about all of the public health functions that they perform that are not reimbursed. I mean, I have no sympathy at all for systems that get, $10 billion worth of tax-free, whatever it is, by being exempt from taxes, and then don't have a documented putback of a comparable amount of money in community benefit. And, the industry will lobby to include the discount that Medicaid and Medicare get from cost or from their commercial rates as part of that contribution, which is rubbish. I don't think these places have done a very good job of actually accounting for the public benefits that they do create. They are, in effect, our public health system. And, I also think that, particularly the Catholic systems that have gotten their tails kicked publicity-wise, Ascension and Providence being the two big ones, they propped up a whole lot of hospitals that would have closed if they hadn't taken them over. And some of the costs, that higher costs, are associated with propping up hospitals and communities that have a lot of Medicaid, that have a lot of uncompensated care, or really sick economies. They haven't done a very good job of telling that story. So I just think there's whole pieces of the, they come to JP Morgan and strut around like captains of industry. That's terribly bad image management. They just can't afford to do that anymore. They need to start behaving like the public health infrastructure that they are in fact, and begin educating the policymakers about the gaps that they are filling. Because there's a lot of these communities that, they don't have they don't have a public hospital like you do in Boston, Rosemarie. They don't have one like LA County and LA or Cook County. There's a lot of places where, in effect, the multi-hospital systems are performing that function, and they're not accounting for it effectively. I mean, that's a lot of mumbling, Matthew. That isn't really a coherent answer to your question. I don't have a policy formula for how you pay them better or differently. But I think there's sort of flawed social accounting. If, the whole northern tier of the United States, if it wasn't for the hospitals, there wouldn't be physicians in those communities because the hospitals have put them on salary. How do you account for that benefit? That is keeping the physician enterprise alive in communities where, frankly, Medicare payment and Medicaid payment just don't cut it. And they're just not enough to keep the doctors in the community. So I think they've done a terrible job of telling that story. And I'm sort of torn by, do I go out there and spend my remaining time in the industry talking about this stuff? It kind of makes me sad that they're not doing a better job.
So let's take one example, because I happened to run into Ross Shrestha, who's the head of innovation at Atrium, which is used to be Carolina's Health, and they just bought or merged with, and essentially it's, they're the quote unquote winner of the merger with Advocate Aurora in Chicago. So I guess the question is, are they have now done this big horizontal merger. They're talking a good game about, efficiency and blah, 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 but the paper that just come out, right, from the Harvard Group suggests that it's not going to make any difference. They've spent, what they were talking about this week is building a big innovation center in Carolina and changing doing kind of tech and service innovation and building a center that's going to generate not only innovation for the health system, but sort of a local, regional, sort of Silicon Valley type innovation atmosphere around there. I mean, that to me, I know Rosemarie, I like him a lot. I think he's done some great work, but to me that goes against him. That's not the kind of public health infrastructure stuff I was thinking about, unless you really believe, like maybe they do, or the folks at Northwell who've got a big deal with this VC company in New York, believe that they are going to be the engine of innovation to change the way healthcare is delivered. I mean, that's going to come out of these big systems.
Well, let's let them try. I mean, I don't think there's an argument for a priori raining on those ideas. And, clearly Silicon Valley has created wealth. It's created hundreds of thousands of jobs, ditto with the Research Triangle in North Carolina. If they can replicate that, if they can create another layer of innovation, this is not a bad thing.
I forget who said it, but somebody said, if you've got an innovation officer or an innovation department, you probably don't have innovation. Because if the culture of the company is not built on innovation, you're not going to be innovative. So I'm not impressed with like setting
Kim,
up a separate place of innovation. It doesn't work that way.
I'm kind of with you. And I know from having a lot of friends in private equity that a lot of these, innovation operations have basically sucked up a lot of the commercial investment opportunities that the professionals passed on. Okay. So they're taking up pet projects and whatever that really aren't commercially viable. So that's not going to help anybody.
So I have a question. This came up at a dinner I was at one night this week with a bunch of healthcare policy pundits, and they said, well, we think that the for-profit hospital systems and potentially insurers are able to do some of the more, cost cutting, make the tough calls on staffing, etc., whatever it is, that the nonprofit cultures are the people in those systems are kind of too nice and won't do the reinvention, maybe call it innovation, that's really necessary. So it's the for-profits that are going to drive that change.
God.
I sat there and thought, really? But the for-profits have this earnings call, kind of all the things they've got to meet. So I guess I'm just curious what you guys think.
I'm curious on what nonprofit health systems actually behave like nonprofits anymore.
I mean, look, if you go back in the literature, when I was, coming up and hanging out with Enhoven and Fuchs and whatever at Stanford, the data already showed by then that the for-profit systems, which is, Columbia HCA in its day and HCA and, Humana and hospitals, were on average 20% more expensive just down the line than everybody else. And, did a better job of things like buying medical supplies at scale and that kind of stuff, and we tended to be more profitable. And of course, their profits go to their shareholders; they don't get reinvested in, in the community, in the hedge fund, hedge funds, endowments, right? But you can argue what you like. But if what are the New York Times? The New York Times or had the big article on Ascension actually, being very aggressive with nurse staffing and cutting down, and the nurses complaining like hell about. Looking at the NHS, not the sort of cushy fat non-profit. So I'm kind of with you there. But my bigger argument here is that the rest of America, quote unquote, innovation, right? New ways of doing things completely, replacing industries that look like one thing and making them much more efficient and effective and changing them, hasn't tended to come from big companies. The Fortune 50, the S&P, that's sort of the top of the companies in the S&P change over every decade or so because you get new companies who come and figure it out. You're seeing a couple of industries now go through this where, the auto business is scrambling. The big giants who've been there monopolies or oligopolies are scrambling to compete with this, this Tesla upstart because it's doing, things in a totally new, different way, and they're trying to compete, et cetera, et cetera. That's how innovation tends to happen here. And expecting it to come out of systems that are doing what they're always doing. And, if Ian Morrison was on the show today, that have sat on the first curve for a long time and not come from the second curve, it's very tough to figure out, how that's really going to come out of this, especially out of the current systems, especially, and go back to the second question I asked Jeff that he kind of didn't really want to answer, is they get paid in a particular way. And I know we have ACOs and, Medicare share savings and whatever, but in general, they're still getting paid the same way they got paid 30 years ago. And they've got very good at, they've all got very, very good at protecting the little piece of that does well for them. So That's my problem with this issue. I accept it's what we got.
I worked in the investor-owned sector at the beginning of my consulting career. I had really close relationships with HCA. I did consulting work for Tenet and American Medical International that merged into Tenet. I know these folks, and I think their principal strength is that they don't chase rabbits, and they run a really lean operation. They don't have 15% or 20% corporate overhead because their shareholders won't let them do it. I went to visit HCA a couple of years ago when I was giving a talk in Nashville, and the corporate office was the same corporate office that it was 40 years ago when I worked with them. And the number of people running the company basically were on one floor. So, that's sort of what Providence was like when they were a client of mine in the 1980s. The entire, you could put the entire leadership of Providence and the order, the Sisters of Providence, on 2 floors of a small medical office, of a small office building in downtown Seattle. Now
how does that
it's
square with the 20% higher you were talking about, Matthew?
well, it's.
They were always.
Their prices were higher, Rosemarie.
Prices, they were more expensive.
They had a better payer mix. So, Hal Andrews, who's a friend who now runs a data analytics firm called Trilliant, based in Nashville, had a piece out a couple of weeks ago that looked at HCA, and HCA at one point had 350 hospitals. They now have 190, and he showed the pattern of divestitures that HCA created over the 20 years between the Rick Scott era and now, or whatever it is, and all the markets that they exited. They only stayed in markets that were growing, that were viable and vital economically, and where they had significant market leverage, and they got out of all the other ones. That's not necessarily a formula for saving our national healthcare financing system, is it? It's a risk selection
not necessarily
strategy.
Is the key word there.
It's a risk selection strategy.
Right.
They put their assets where they could earn a decent return. That is not an option available to a significant fraction of our actors in the hospital marketplace. You're in St. Louis, you got a problem. You're in Detroit, you got a problem. So it is, geography is sort of destiny. And if you're in a part of the United States that's really struggling economically, let me tell you, the hospital system is struggling too. And so are the health insurers that are subsidizing them. So, I mean,
UPMC or Cleveland Clinic.
What?
Tell it to UPMC or Cleveland Clinic.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, but they, what have they done? They spread their risk geographically. They pushed out 200 miles. And tried to compensate for, the reality that the urban core that they had, been located in was sort of dying or actually dying. Oh, I started in healthcare in a large urban academic health center that was dying. It left scars. To this day, those experiences were searing, because we really didn't have a lot of options available to us. And what saved the place? A management that realized they had to soak Blue Cross in order to subsidize all of those losses to Medicaid and to the 13% of their patients that didn't have health insurance at all. Is that a solution to our nation's healthcare problem? It was what they had to do to survive.
Right. Well, the Commonwealth Fund just came out with a series of reports about how to think about cost containment at a policy level, and interviewed a bunch of states that have been trying things, including obviously Maryland and Massachusetts, but a bunch of other ones, and capping high provider prices, adopting multi-payer value-based payment models, limiting the rate of growth of provider prices. It's all that. And yet the political will is not necessarily going to be there right now, because hospitals have brought us through this COVID time, saved a lot of lives, and I think at some great sacrifice. And so it's hard to align the fact that folks are feeling the huge cost of healthcare, like you're talking about, Matthew. At the same time, they're going to want to keep their hospital at whatever cost that is. And so how do you put that together?
You see
It's a
microcosms
19
of this. Go on, Jeff. Sorry.
It's a 1970s solution to a 2023 problem. Is per capita health cost lower in Massachusetts because of all your cost containment activities? Is
Well,
it
I
lower
wouldn't-
in Maryland? Is it lower in Maryland than
I don't know what Maryland is.
socioeconomically comparable place? These
Maryland, they figured out how to get it on the non-inpatient stuff.
Right.
But
So,
but
you
that's-
know, when I was
And our
responsible,
cost containment stuff hasn't gone far enough, honestly. It's not.
well, and it hasn't anywhere. So, you know, when I was responsible for government affairs at the University of Chicago, I came within an eyelash of getting a rate setting system put in Illinois because I realized we couldn't compete. And I wanted to confiscate suburban hospital profits through the mechanism of subsidies to fund my uncompensated care. And I came within an eyelash of pulling it off. Ronald
Wow.
Reagan's election basically killed it. So
I
was, you know, it was the only thing I could figure a way to put a floor under our losses was by having a rate review system that basically was an all-payer system that forced Medicaid to not dump on the rest of everybody else.
I've been involved in a few Twitter things about, somebody says, the hospital profits are way down here and health insurers like, United are way up here. Like one of them picked on Intermountain versus UHC. So I had to point out, well, the United had big profits, but as a percentage of the revenue, it's actually lower than Intermountain. And B,
that's not right.
It is. It was.
It ain't right.
And B, Optum is now the largest physician group in the country, and C, most of its earnings don't come from health insurance. And D, Intermountain also runs a health plan. So these lines between health insurers and the health systems are gone.
So when you say it's not right, you're saying it's not right morally, or that
I don't believe the percentages that you've just cited.
Well,
I don't believe them.
I looked at the Intermountain annual report and the UHC annual reports.
And what is what is Intermountain's operating profit, Kim?
It was like 6 or 7%.
And United's is what?
United's is lower than that.
United's is 8 or 9. So that's rubbish. I'm sorry.
I'm pretty good at math.
All right. We'll have to argue this.
I do this for a living.
They're compare. All right. There's some comparison. There's also some cross cutting. So cross counting on what they are doing. I would agree with that. And a significant part of the profit is from Optum, which is I think it's half the profit is from Optum.
It's half the profit.
But it's a third of the revenue or something. So
a third of the revenue, but half the profit, and nearly all of the profit growth is in Optum.
Yeah.
But it's it's still 20 of their 25 or 27 billion in total profit. Half of it is from their health insurance operation. It's still by itself an enormously profitable activity.
So what we're on, so I do want to bring up one point, which is that North Carolina, which I'm now an expert on because I'm a good son of the company, that North Carolina has just moved its state employees from Blue Cross North Carolina to, I believe, Aetna. And the state treasurer there has got all active. And I think this is kind of going back to Rosemarie's point, and maybe Jeff's point about the 1970s, in that the Blue Cross regime, so Patrick Conway went there and then had his issue with drunk driving, whatever, and had to leave. Now it's back at Optum. But the Blue Cross regime had them, and it had, North Carolina became a microcosm of the ex-Obama folks, Blue Cross and the state and elsewhere, Mandy Cohen and others were playing a part. And they were kind of pushing ACOs and risk-based stuff and cooperation with the systems. I know we had Atrium, which is very expensive, but they were kind of pushing the sort of CMS, can we get a payment system that works and puts people at risk? And as far as I can tell, the state employer, I don't know the name of the treasurer who's pushing this, has said, this is all BS. It doesn't save me any money. We're better off to go to I want to come after the hospitals for their rate setting and have a cheap, and basically just have cheaper rates. Which sounds much more like he's decided that 1970s Maryland is the only answer he's got. And I just, don't know if we've done so much. I mean, what did it see? The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, CMI, came out with a study that said of all the different payment things they've done, only 3 of them have actually ever worked. and they tried all these different experiments, and now, we can't figure it out. Nothing works. The only people,
Maryland was one of them.
yeah, the only people who seem to be able to get anywhere here are the Health Rosetta people who have done it with the Pittsburgh School District and the Rosen Hotels in Orlando, and nobody else in America. It just seems to me that we're on the hospital system side and the healthcare delivery as a whole, because everyone is in some kind of a system. Even me running around looking for my retina issue this week ended up in the Marin Health system, which is kind of part of the UCSF system, sort of in some way connected. We're stuck with it, and we've got to figure out a way to make them work better. We're not going to replace them with Amazon. It's just right. It's not happening. I'm disappointed, but that's where it is.
Well, I'm a big believer in transparency. I mean, Kim, I studied the guys that run Intermountain were friends of mine. It's a system I've done retreats for. I know them. It's the best managed and highest quality private nonprofit system in the United States. It's an amazing operation, but the hospital business overall is a 2.5% to 3% operating margin. And this year it's going to be a minus 2.5% to 3% operating margin. Health insurance, 5 to 7, 5%. And the growth is all in Medicare Advantage, as I'm sure you know. So, right now the balance of power tilts dramatically towards the payers. And, just two of them, CVS, Aetna, and United Health Group, are almost 15% of total US health spending. So you tell me what the problem is. 15%, just two entities.
On the payer thing, it's worth noting this week, talking about going back to the 70s, we're now back in the 90s. We mentioned Rick Scott and HCA, and we probably mentioned the X-Files, and what else is going on in the 90s? What a great stuff.
Flock of seagulls.
Anthem is buying another non-profit health plan, Blue Cross of Louisiana.
I suspect a struggling Blue Cross plan.
Yeah, they're acquiring another struggling Blue Cross plan, but that's going to lead to another foundation. Back to the whole, are we going to turn more of the non-profit system into for-profit? They haven't.
I love that they spent.
A couple of decades.
I don't know. I've been trying to get someone to tell me what they spend to rename them elephants. I mean,
probably
I
more
don't
than they're
know why.
spending buying Blue Cross of Louisiana.
Well, no, I mean, but they would have spotted the idea that the best way to remember it is by a herd of elephants, right? I mean, it's amazing to me that they didn't think of it. Elephants. I mean, come on. They're an elephant.
I'll remember that. I love elephants.
Elephants.
My life was going on safari and seeing like 300 elephants surrounding the truck I was in, and my guide telling me to get off the roof because he thought I was going to attract too many elephants too close.
Matthew, I mean, unfortunately, I think a lot of these ideas, like ACOs and whatever, the only reason they survived is because they turned into an industry.
Sure.
They turned into franchises.
Yeah.
So now you've got, even with the drop in values, you've got 3 or 4 entities that are operating in ACO space that are still unicorns. And my friends in consulting build tens of billions of dollars in consulting fees to help people do this. So it may not have saved the society a dime, but it created a lot of jobs.
I thought that on balance, the physician-led ACOs were more cost-effective. Like
they are.
If you listen to Father Moscashari's tweets, yeah, absolutely.
They are, but Caravan was had most of them or a lot of them, and they ended up being merged into Signify,
right? And
then bought by who?
CBS. CBS bought it. So it's
CBS bought it. So I mean,
CBS, yeah.
What happened to the savings? The people that built those companies walked away with tens of millions of dollars. And what about the docs in their networks? Where were their yachts?
The most upsetting thing about this whole Signify business is the guy who owns almost all Signify is called Matthew Holt, and it's not me.
Oh no, and it's not you.
It's the wrong Matthew Holt.
Matthew,
just the Matthew kept on inviting him on our show so that she could.
How can you be around all this innovation and not figure out how to get paid?
I don't know.
That's the part I don't understand.
Especially with the wrong name.
It's just the wrong Matthew Holt. I'm just
the wrong guy. Literally in this case. Anyway, Kim, we didn't get there, but I did want to go back to you a bit about the US. What's a good medical school? Just in the last couple of minutes we have.
Great question.
On the other hand, that I've been listening to a whole bunch of stuff about the future of China and the future of Russia, and how this is all these countries that America is lucky because we had the millennial boom, but most other countries didn't have that, and therefore they're running out of, especially China and the East Asian countries are running out of younger people. And I was thinking about, two things. One is, where the hell are the robots, which are going to be coming for various different roles, and maybe that will be the solution for that. But then that led me to believe that we've actually seen a big increase in people applying to medical school since the pandemic, and the medical,
Good for them.
and
We're going to need them.
We're going to need them, right?
We're going to need them.
But also the other thing about, there was a lot of arguing back and forth about obviously the structure of US medical education residency and how many specialty places versus how many family practice places. And we've had this problem, forever, our system's kind of the wrong way around. But one way of doing this is just, is creating more doctors and building more medical schools. So I don't know if, Stanford and Harvard are actually the issue or the problem, but don't we need, it's kind of like Biden's talking about bumping community colleges to provide more sort of technical workers for things like solar power and what have you. Is there something in here about what we should be thinking about the next Flexner report about how we extend medical education to more people? I don't know the answer here, but is this connected to the US News World Report thing?
We did add something like 20 medical schools during this century so far. There was a big expansion in the number of medical schools. A lot of them were virtual, that didn't actually have didn't own the teaching hospital. We've got Eastern Virginia Medical School here in the Tidewater. You've got the Northeastern Ohio College of Medicine Without Walls. You've got actually a bunch of new. Kaiser started a new medical school. Yeah. There's a dramatic expansion in our medical school infrastructure during the last 20 years.
The two big questions I would have about medical schools is, one, why in the US does it take several years longer to train a doctor than it does anywhere in the world?
Great question, Kim.
It's just more cost. And
Great
secondly,
question.
Why in 2023 do we still have DOs and MDs having the dual system, and the training is the same? There's no reason they go to the same hospitals, they get trained the same way. It serves no purpose other than to support the organizations that have grown up to oversee them.
Well, I mean, the original question that you ask is a really complicated one, and there's not a glib answer to it either, which is, how do you actually evaluate the quality of these enterprises? I mean, I can tell you a medical school dean looks at his research output, and how effectively they are able to compete for NIH dollars. I mean, not everybody can play in that game, but that's certainly, that gives you the Hopkinses and UCSFs and Emory's and Dukes of the world. So you can kind of look at the research funding and get a pretty good idea of how much scientific substance there is in the organization. But that other question about, what about the quality of the docs that they turn out?
Yeah, that's the key one.
How about, what happens to them? Are they practicing more cost-effective medicine? These are great questions.
It's sort of like, is it really a value to go into Harvard as a college? Well, probably not, except in terms of who you meet.
Right.
And what's the equivalent in medical school for that?
Great question. Don't know.
We don't know.
That's an area I work in.
I can tell you that on Monday, when I had a weird thing in my eye and thought I was having a detached retina, I eventually got, after calling around and finally getting somebody showing our non-primary care system. I wrote this up on the blog, so you can all go read it. I ended up in the office of a guy, and on his wall was his 2 degrees. He had an undergrad from Harvard and Harvard Medical School, and he had a master's in physiology, I think, from Balliol College, Oxford. So I walked into his office and I said, so you went to Harvard and Oxford? So I went to Stanford and Cambridge. I'm not sure I trust you.
Well, but then what you should have asked him is, what are you doing in Greenbrae, dude?
he's doing fine. Lots of wealthy people
is
checking their eyes to make sure they're all okay. And apparently mine are okay. All right, guys, we are at time, so I want to really quickly go around and say, what are we looking for next? So why don't I start with you, Rosemarie?
Oh wow. I'm just gonna try to stay hopeful. I don't know. And I look for the silver linings. And I was speaking about that this week in some meetings I was in. Just trying to find, and we didn't get to talk about health equity today, but an outcome of the pandemic is that there's much more attention on the real data that has to be obtained to manage the health equity situation. And a topic for another day is actually the practice of medicine and developing more trust across the patient population and the providers. So I'm gonna stay focused on that, because that's a tough hill to climb, but a really important one.
Absolutely. Kim.
Well, I hate to say it, but the Cincinnati Bengals are playing in the AFC Championship on Sunday for the second year in a row, and there is nothing going on in Cincinnati other than the Bengals coverage. Even the weather forecasts are tailored around what the weather is going to be like here and in Kansas City. So that's all people are going to be talking about the next couple of days.
All right, we'll see.
And I'm not even a Bengals fan.
They may even end up, if San Francisco's extremely lucky, playing San Francisco in the Super Bowl. Although it looks more like they're going to be playing Philadelphia, but should be interesting. Jeff.
Well, they're going to be two great conference championship games, is for sure. Lots of luck on both of them. I'm back in the future. I don't like the present. It's already happened. So I've been spending a lot of the last couple of weeks working on 2030. I'm giving a presentation on Monday to Roche Diagnostics Latin American operation, and they asked me to talk about what healthcare was going to be like in 2030, what we could expect in the way of scientific advances, what the major risks are to public health and to societies. So I've abandoned the present. I'm pretty discouraged with right now, and I'm out there in the future where everything's going to be fine.
That's a fantastic way to end. You have been listening to myself, Matthew Holt, with Kim Bellard from Boston, Massachusetts. Sorry, Kim Bellard. Kim Bellard from Cincinnati. Dave from Boston, Massachusetts. I get it right. And Jeff Goldsmith from the wilds of rural Virginia. This was THCB Gang for January the 26th, 2023. We covered a lot. There's more to be covered, and we will be getting to that future that Jeff's already in, rather more slowly than he is at some point. But we look forward to talking to you there. I'll be back next week on Thursday, and it'll already be February the 2nd. How did that happen so quickly? With another episode of THCB Gang. So looking forward to seeing you then. Thanks for watching, or thanks for listening on the podcast. Take care for now, and goodbye.